Exodus chapter 12. And lots of good stuff here. The first two verses in Exodus 12. Now Yahweh said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month shall be the beginning of months for you. It is to be the first month of the year to you." Now this is the beginning of the Hebrew year. And actually, we don't know as far as we know for sure, this is the beginning of the Hebrew calendar, although it probably was already in effect. The first month is given the name Abib, and that's in the next chapter. Verse 4, it says, "On this day in the month of Abib, you are about to go forth." Now, Abib, what does Abib mean? Aviv. Sometimes it's a V instead of a B. Anybody know? Nope. Okay. It means spring or a young year of grain. Okay, and that's when the young year of grain comes out, is in the spring. It overlaps with our modern months of March or April, and it depends. It's not going to be consistent with our calendar at all. Yeah, first month. So it's the very first month. Yeah. Yeah, this is supposed to be the first month of the year. Now, the other months in Scripture don't have names. This is the only one that has a name. However, if you look later in Scripture after the Babylonian captivity, they use the Babylonian names for the months. And it was named after the Babylonian gods. Okay, like Nisan and others. It was named after their gods, and they adopted it. And it's in the rest of the Tanakh that way. Let's look at verses 3 and 4. "Speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, on the 10th of this month, they are each one to take a lamb for themselves according to their father's households, a lamb for each household. Now if the household is too small for a lamb, then he and his neighbor nearest to his house are to take one according to the number of persons in them. According to what each man should eat, you are to divide the lamb. So each household that's large enough to take a lamb for themselves is supposed to do so. If the family's not large enough, they share. Okay, they get one lamb and share it. Just a neighborly thing to do. Verses 5 and 6. Your lamb shall be an unblemished male, a year old. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats. You shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month. Then the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel is to kill it at twilight." Now, you remember how John the Baptist announced Yeshua? He said, "Behold, the Lamb of Eolhim." Okay, now when Yeshua rode in on a donkey into Jerusalem, before he was killed on a stake, that was on the 10th of Nisan, because that's the day that you're supposed to take the lamb into your house. It's going to be your pet for several days. Okay? Then on the 14th, you are to kill it at twilight. And he was killed at precisely the time of the killing of the Passover lamb. That's what we're told in John. Now, it can be a lamb or a goat. And like I said, it's going to be a family pet for several days. How many of y'all are familiar with baby lambs or baby goats? A little bit? Can they be any cuter? No. They cannot be any cuter, can they? They're just... the term adorable comes up. I mean, they really are. It's going to be the kid's pet now for about 5 days, and you're going to kill it. This is going to have meaning here. Now, the feast, it's not really for individuals. It's for families to observe, okay? Families and groups are to observe it. And all the families in the nation of Israel are to observe it. This plague involves the death of either the firstborn of each family or the death of a substitutionary lamb. So there's a death involved here with this particular feast day. Verse 7. Moreover, they shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and on the lintel of the houses in which they eat. So it's the blood on the doorpost that's actually going to save the family from losing their firstborn. The only reason the people put the blood on the doorpost was out of faithfulness. Okay, they believed the words of Elohim and they acted upon them. Now, if you believed him and didn't act upon it, what happened? Didn't matter if you believed or not. Okay? See, that's the whole thing. If you don't act upon the Father's words, oh, but I got faith in him. Well, that doesn't matter. Okay? Simply doesn't matter. They had faithfulness, but their faithfulness without works means death. Now, if we truly have faithfulness, it's submissive, humble, and obedient to the Torah, and that's the way it is. And I went ahead and put this up here in case people didn't know what a lintel was. I thought I'd put that up there. It's not the bowl of stuff. Verse 8, and they shall eat the flesh that same night, roasted with fire. They shall eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Roasting the lamb was the only way of cooking the lamb without breaking any of its limbs, and that was important. Also, everyone in the family all needed to realize they were eating from the same lamb. Verses 9 and 10, do not eat any of it raw or boiled at all with water, but rather roasted with fire, both its head and its legs along with its entrails. You shall not leave any of it over until morning, but whatever is left of it until morning, you shall burn with fire. So the lamb is roasted whole. It doesn't have any bones broken. The entrails are to be roasted also. The lamb, it's going to be whole, okay? Nothing is to be left until morning. If there are any leftovers, they're to be burned with a fire. The entire lamb is to be consumed either by the people or by the fire. Verse 11. Now you shall eat it in this manner, with your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. You shall eat it in haste. It is Yahweh's Passover. Now, I showed you the Hebrew writing of the Father's name here. What we don't have are the vowel marks with that. It's the Yod-He, Vav-He. And to the best of our knowledge, at least the people that speak conversational Hebrew that I have listened to, it's pronounced Yahweh. Now, in the Tanakh, in English translations, they replace this Hebrew name here with capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D. Okay? So what this is really saying, it is Yahweh's Passover. That's what the Hebrew is telling us. And I know I'm not saying Passover right, but look at this particular feast is to be done in the place. By the way, the sacrifice is to be done in the place that Elohim designates. That's why we can't fully celebrate Passover correctly yet, because we're not in the right place. We're not in the right place to do the offering. It says in Deuteronomy 16, verses 1 and 2, observe the month of Abib and celebrate the Passover to Yahweh your Elohim. For in the month of Abib, Yahweh your Elohim brought you out of Egypt by night. You shall sacrifice the Passover to Yahweh your Elohim from the flock and the herd in the place where Yahweh chooses to establish his name. So as much as we want to celebrate Passover to its fullest extent, we can't do so. Okay, we do the best we can. And what we're doing is really rehearsing for when we can celebrate it properly. Now, I just told you the name of it. It's Yahweh's Passover. Look at Leviticus 23, verse 5. That's what it said in Exodus 12, 11, and also Leviticus 23, 5. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, at twilight, is Yahweh's Passover. In Numbers 28, verse 16, then on the 14th day of the first month shall be Yahweh's Passover. The Passover is specifically called a feast to Yahweh. Look at Exodus 12, verse 14. Now this day shall be a memorial to you. You shall celebrate it as a feast to Yahweh. Throughout your generations, you are to celebrate it as a permanent ordinance. Now, why am I emphasizing this so much? Because it is so important that we don't be fooled by a Christian tradition called the Lord's Supper. Okay? How many times is the phrase the Lord's Supper used in all of Scripture? Once. But how much emphasis do they place on that? Oh my goodness. It's a sacrament in many churches. Celebrated in all churches that I know of. The Lord's Supper, which was nothing more, it was Passover. It was Passover. Take a look where the only place it's mentioned. 1 Corinthians 11, verse 20. Therefore, when you meet together, it's not to eat the Lord's Supper. The Greek word is deipnon. For in your eating, each one takes his own supper first. One is hungry, another's drunk, whatever. Look at what that word deipnon means. It means feast. And the word Lord here, now in the Brit Hadashah, you don't get capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D, because it's in Greek. They don't use the Hebrew letters. So with that word, it's a Greek word theos that they use. It could mean master. It could mean Yahweh or Elohim. Okay? And what we have here is Yahweh's feast. This is Yahweh's feast that he's talking about. The same word is translated in the Brit Hadashah that way. Look at Matthew 23, verses 5 and 6 in the King James Version. But all the works they do for to be seen of men. They make broad their phylacteries and enlarge the borders of their garments, and they love the uppermost rooms at feasts. Same Greek word, deipnon. And the chief seats in the synagogues. In Luke 20, verse 46, beware of the scribes which desire to walk in long robes and love greetings in the markets, and the highest seats in the synagogues, and the chief rooms at the feasts. It's also translated supper at the time of the Passover meal. In John 13, verses 1 and 2. Now before the feast of Passover, Yeshua, knowing that his hour had come, that he should depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to an end. And during deipnon, the feast of Passover, the devil having already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, to betray him. The whole Lord's Supper thing in Christianity is a sham. Okay? It's just merely a rejection of the Father's feast days, and it's a fabrication of something that never existed. Okay? It's anti-Semitic. All they're trying to do is get rid of anything that they see as Jewish. It's not Passover. Yes, it is. You know, when he said to his disciples, and 9 times it's recorded in the Gospels, and I must celebrate this feast of Passover with you, my disciples. I must do that. He said it 9 times in all 4 Gospels. There's no denying it. Okay? People want to make it into something that it's not. But no, he celebrated the Passover. Why did he celebrate it early? Because he knew he was going to die when that Passover lamb was killed. But he still celebrated it the right day, just earlier in the day. After the sun went down, the previous day, the sun went down, then they celebrated it. It was still on the right day. And there's more, and I'll show you here in just a minute. Let's go back to Exodus. Oh, once again, this is the only place in Scripture where the term Lord's Supper is used. And it's an obvious reference to Yahweh's Passover. Verse 12. For I'll go through the land of Egypt on that night, and I'll strike down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. And against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am Yahweh. We've mentioned that one of the main objectives of the plagues is to strike down the gods of Egypt, as well as make his name known throughout the land. Verse 13. And the blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you live. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you. And no plague will befall you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. The blood shall be a sign for you. You know, Yeshua used this same phrase in a similar way in reference to his own blood. He said, Luke 22, verse 20, in the same way, he took the cup after he had eaten, saying, this cup which is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood. See, once again, he doesn't say the new covenant is his blood. The new covenant is in his blood. His blood is the blood of the covenant. It's the blood of the agreement. You know, you watch those old Indian movies. What do? They're going to make a covenant. They slice their palms and each, and then they shake hands. They're making a blood covenant. And from the movies I saw, they took that serious. Verse 14. Now this day shall be a memorial. Hebrew word is zikaron to you. And you shall celebrate it as a feast to Yahweh. Throughout your generations, you are to celebrate it as a permanent ordinance. So this feast is to be celebrated as a memorial. As a memorial. That's what it's called. You know, let's look at that Hebrew word, zikaron. Oh, it means remembrance. It's translated as remembrance 4 times. A memorial, remembrance. Okay. Okay, I think it's interesting they use memorial here in reference to the Passover, because do you remember what Yeshua said about Passover? And going back to 1 Corinthians, which we were just reading, starting at verse 23, for I received from the master that which I also delivered to you, that the master Yeshua, in the night which he was betrayed, took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, this is my body which is for you. Do this in remembrance, or as a memorial of me. In the same way, he took the cup after supper, saying, this cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. It's Yahweh's feast as a memorial. Now, Yeshua made full the Passover through his death, and he was the Passover lamb. He made it full. By the way, the feast days were all made full. The spring feast days were. The fall ones haven't been fulfilled, made full yet. But these were. We had the Feast of Weeks. That's when the Spirit of the Father came down upon the people. And that was made full. We had the Feast of First Fruits, which is the first day of the week after the Sabbath, after the Passover. Okay? Feast of First Fruits. That's when he resurrected. It was after the Passover the Sabbath was over after the Passover. See, all these things were made full through the Messiah. The spring feasts were. Now, Yeshua said to do this as often as you do it as a memorial to him. And sounds like it's still a permanent ordinance. Verse 15. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, but on the first day you shall remove leaven from your houses. For whoever eats anything leavened from the first day until the 7th day, that person shall be cut off from Israel. See, the unleavened bread symbolizes the sinless life of Yeshua. Paul reminds us we are to celebrate the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. By the way, what does leaven represent again? Sin. It's symbolic of sin. There's nothing wrong with leaven or yeast, okay? But when it's used in a symbolic fashion in Scripture, it represents sin. So during this time, during that week, you eat unleavened bread. Look what Paul said to do. 1 Corinthians 5, starting in verse 7, clean out the old leaven that you may be a new lump, just as you are in fact unleavened, for Messiah our Passover has been sacrificed. Let us therefore celebrate the feast, not with old leaven, nor with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. By the way, 1 Corinthians 5, where did we just read about how Paul said to celebrate the Passover? 1 Corinthians 11, just a few chapters later. Is there any passage in Scripture you can think of that justifies a separate Lord's Supper ceremony, cracker and grape juice thing? There's nothing there. We just went over it. We went over them all. And I was looking in study Bible, which I don't ever recommend a study Bible. If you have a study Bible, I would just take a black, if you have one you want to keep it, take a black magic marker and just cross out all the notes at the bottom. It said, this particular note was, Christians are to replace the Passover with the Lord's Supper. And then it used this as the reference. 1 Corinthians 5, 7 and 8. There, does that make sense to you? Is that what it says? Replace Passover with the Lord's Supper? Is that what it says? I didn't read it that way either.
You're to take that big meal and supplant that with juice and crackers.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting, huh?
Feast for the family.
You don't want to juice and crackers. You don't want to do too much to celebrate something.
Oh, no.
Just mere acknowledgement, just tip your nose up.
Sure. Then they take for as often as you do this in remembrance of me. So they take that to mean however often you want to do this, okay? It's a remembrance. No, it means every time you celebrate Passover now, it's a remembrance of me. That's what that means. Remember that. That's what he's saying. Okay, let's look at verses 16 and 17. And on the first day you shall have a holy assembly, and another holy assembly on the seventh day. No work at all shall be done on them, except what must be eaten by every person. That alone may be prepared by you. You shall also observe the feast of unleavened bread, for on this very day I brought your hosts out of the land of Egypt. Therefore you shall observe this day throughout your generations as a permanent ordinance. Now, Passover and unleavened bread, it's really an 8-day thing. It's considered one feast. Passover is the introduction into the feast of unleavened bread. It's a feast of thanksgiving for deliverance and a feast of remembrance for the price that was paid for that deliverance. Okay? Yeshua advanced the meaning of the Passover to be a remembrance of his sacrifice and him being the Lamb of Eolhim who takes away the sin of the world. John 1 verse 29, the next day he, being John the witness, saw Yeshua coming to him and said, "Behold the Lamb of Elohim who takes away the sin of the world." How did he know that? How did he know that? He was told that in the wilderness. And then he said, "You'll know for sure because my spirit, my breath is going to descend upon him like a dove. Then you'll know it's him." And he says, "Oh, I witnessed that. I witnessed that. That's the guy. That's the guy." That was John's big duty, was to pronounce, that's the guy, with every certainty in the world. And then the Father's voice came down and reaffirmed it. And I'm sure he said, "Oh yeah, that's the guy." Verse 18. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at evening. 7 days there shall be no leaven found in your houses. For whoever eats what is leavened, that person shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he's an alien or a native of the land. You shall not eat anything leavened. In all your dwellings you shall eat unleavened bread. The emphasis is upon removing leaven in our dwellings. This points to the necessity of removing sin in our lives during this time.
And that's a pretty heavy threat there.
It is a heavy threat. You're right. You'll be cut off. You know, and that's what Paul is speaking of there in 1 Corinthians 5, 7, and 8. Celebrate this feast, not with the leaven of malice, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. No sin, no sin. Celebrate this feast without sin. And it's not that difficult to avoid sin. It's really not. Once sin is defined for us, it's not difficult. In Exodus 12, verses 21 through 23. Then Moses called for the elders of Israel and said to them, "Go and take for yourselves lambs according to your families and slay the Passover lamb. You shall take a bunch of hyssop and dip it in the blood which is in the basin and apply some of the blood that is in the basin to the lintel and the 2 doorposts. None of you shall go outside the door of his house until morning. For Yahweh will pass through to smite the Egyptians, and when he sees the blood on the lintel and on the doorposts, Yahweh will pass over the door and will not allow the destroyer to come into your houses to smite you. You know, once again, the people had faithfulness. Faithfulness. Their faithfulness without obedience is worthless. It was their obedience that was necessary for deliverance. One other thing I want to point out here too. Look at verse 16 here of Exodus 12. And it says, on the first day you shall have a holy assembly, another holy assembly on the seventh day. No work at all shall be done. So this is a kind of like a Sabbath, right? And then it says, except what must be eaten by every person, that alone may be prepared by you. So we look at this. This is our halakha. People can look at it differently. That on the Sabbath day, it is allowable to prepare food. Okay? If it's okay on this day, what makes it different than the Sabbath? The only thing that's different from a Sabbath is it's not a seventh day of the week. It's a special day of no rest. All right? In the book of John, they refer to the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread as a high Sabbath. It's a peculiar Sabbath. It's one that's not ordinary. Okay? That's why they had to get him down off the stake on a Thursday night. Because Friday starts as soon as the sun goes down. That's the Feast of Unleavened Bread. First day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, day of no work. So he's in the grave for that special day of no work. He's in the grave for that Sabbath day. After the Sabbath is over, the resting is over. It's done. He was there 3 days and 3 nights. Thursday night. Not completely, but close. Friday night. Saturday night. Resurrected after Saturday night. It said he would raise on the third day. Well, he was killed Thursday at 3. Friday at 3 would be 24 hours. Saturday at 3 would be 72 hours. Or 48 hours. And before Sunday at 3, which is the third, makes it still on the third day, would have been 72 hours. So, it fits very well with everything we know in Scripture. Okay, look at verse 24. You shall observe this ordinance as an ordinance, or observe this event as an ordinance for you and your children forever. It will come about when you enter the land which Yahweh will give you, as he has promised that you shall observe this rite. This is to be an ordinance forever. Okay? Forever. It says it in verse 24 and also in verse 14. You shall observe this event as an ordinance for you and your children forever. This day shall be a memorial to you. You shall celebrate it as a feast to Yahweh throughout your generations. You are to celebrate it as a permanent ordinance. It's permanent. It's forever. Verse 26. It will come about when your children say to you, what does this rite mean to you? That you shall say, it is a Passover sacrifice to Yahweh, who passed over the houses of the sons of Israel in Egypt when he smote the Egyptians, but spared our homes, and the people bowed low and worshipped. Then the sons of Israel went and did so. Just as Yahweh had commanded Moses and Aaron, so they did. We use the Passover as a lesson to our children as an illustration of what Elohim did for us. And celebrating this feast with your kids is truly a blessing. When we celebrate it and point out how the sacrifice of Yeshua made this feast full, then we understand the rich meaning of these appointed times. And that's what we want to pass on to our children. That's what we're told to do in the Torah. Verses 29 and 30. Now it came about at midnight that Yahweh struck all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on his throne to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the cattle. And Pharaoh arose in the night, he and all his servants and all the Egyptians. And there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was no home where there was not someone dead. You know, a lot of Some people look at this and have said, it's not fair that the firstborn of those in Egypt were killed. You know what we need to remember? Just a few years earlier, say a few hundred years earlier with Joseph, who was going to die if it weren't for Joseph? Everybody. The famine would have destroyed everybody. And Egypt enslaved those who saved their lives. And this was a strange night in Egypt. It's been said there are no people more remarkable and frantic in their mournings than the ancient Egyptians. When a relative died, everyone left the house, and the women with their hair loose and their bosoms bare ran wild in the streets. The men also, with their apparel equally disordered, kept them company, all shrieking, howling, and beating themselves. Now that's the kind of scene of horror and distress that presented itself that night. There was not a family in Egypt where there was not one dead.
Separated people.
Right. Yeah, of Egypt.
Right. Well, there's so many people in Egypt.
Of Egypt. Verse 31. Then he called for Moses and Aaron at night and said, "Rise up and get out from among my people, both you and the sons of Israel, and go worship Yahweh as you have said. Take both your flocks and your herds as you have said, and go and bless me also." And the Egyptians urged the people to send them out of the land in haste, for they said, "We shall all be dead." Pharaoh finally understands Elohim is in control and he is over all. He finally gets that fact. Verse 34. So the people took their dough before it was leavened, with their kneading bowls bound up in the clothes on their shoulders. Now the sons of Israel had done according to the word of Moses, for they had requested from the Egyptians articles of silver and articles of gold and clothing. And Yahweh had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. So they let them have their request. Thus they plundered the Egyptians. So they plundered the Egyptians. Now keep in mind, what did they just get a few hundred years earlier? Pretty much all the gold in the world. Remember when the famine came and people wanted to buy food? What could they use to buy food? Well, all the money they had. And then when the money ran out, then what? Cattle, livestock. Then when that ran out, all the land. So Egypt owned everything in the world, essentially, thanks to Joseph, thanks to Elohim using Joseph in this manner. And now look what happens. Israel plunders them and essentially takes all the gold and silver. Well, bless their hearts. They took about all they had. Proverbs 16 verse 7 says, when a man's ways are pleasing to Yahweh, he makes even his enemies to be at peace with him. And that's what happened. Exodus 12, verse 37. Now the sons of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Succoth, about 600,000 men on foot, aside from children. And the mixed multitude also went up with them, along with flocks and herds, a very large number of livestock. And they baked the dough which they had brought out of Egypt into cakes of unleavened bread, for it had not become leavened, since they were driven out of Egypt and could not delay, nor had they prepared any provisions for themselves. So 600,000 men of Israel, plus women and children. Plus there was a mixed multitude. The people that left that day were not a single bloodline. Keep that in mind. Israel is not a bloodline. Verse 40. Now the time of the sons of Israel lived in Egypt was 430 years. And it came about at the end of 430 years to the very day that all the hosts of Yahweh went out from the land of Egypt. It is a night to be observed for Yahweh for having brought them out from the land of Egypt. This night is for Yahweh to be observed by all the sons of Israel throughout their generations. Now, they were in Egypt exactly 430 years to the day. And a lot of scholars deny this fact. The Believer Study Bible says they were probably there only 215 years, which I thought was interesting. And they get that because of this passage in 1 Kings 6, verse 1. It came to pass in the 480th year after the children of Israel had come out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign of Israel, in the month of Ziv, which is the 2nd month, he began to build the house of Yahweh. So they take 480 years and subtract back, and things don't add up too well for them. The thing is, the exodus from Egypt was more ancient than they believe it was. Verse 43. And Yahweh said to Moses and Aaron, this is the ordinance of the Passover. No foreigner is to eat of it. But every man's slave purchased with money, after you have circumcised him, then he may eat of it. A sojourner or a hired servant shall not eat of it. It is to be eaten in a single house. You are not to bring forth any of the flesh outside of the house, nor are you to break any of it. All the congregation of Israel are to celebrate this. All the congregation of Israel is to celebrate Passover. The Hebrew word for congregation is edah. Okay? And it means congregation of Israel. And it's the same Greek word as ecclesia. This is translated as church in the Brit Hadashah. So if you look here, congregation, edah, it just means congregation, assembly. In ecclesia, it means an assembly, a congregation. But it's translated as church 74 times. But its meaning is just a congregation or an assembly. In 1 Corinthians 11 again, let's go back to the Passover discussion. What do you think? Do you not have houses in which to eat and drink? Do you despise the ecclesia of Eolhim and shame those who have nothing? What shall I say to you? Shall I praise you? In this I will not praise you. For I received from the Master that which I also delivered to you, that the Master Yeshua, in the night in which he was betrayed, took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, this is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me. What bread did he break? That was the afikomen. Remember that? In the same way, he took the cup after supper, saying, this cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. And Paul also said, if you look back here, look at verse 44. Every man's slave purchased with money, after you have circumcised him, then he may eat of it. All men are to be circumcised. Remember where Paul says in 1 Corinthians 11, every man must examine himself. Okay? Corinthians, they're Greeks. They weren't circumcised. So in order to partake of Passover, they had to get circumcised. And there were people lying about it. He said, no, you're going to have to get circumcised. You need to examine yourself, by the way. We're not going to have Tom at the door checking to see who's eligible and who isn't. Yeah, with the meat cleaver, no. So examine yourself, okay? And then he says, no one would, the congregation wouldn't suffer if one were to judge the body rightly. And everyone thinks, well, I judge the congregation rightly. No, it doesn't mean the body of the stupid church you go to. It means judge yourself. You need to be circumcised, okay? And because they broke this, he said, some of you were sick and some went to sleep. Some people died for this reason. Exodus 12, verses 48 and 49. But if a stranger sojourns with you and celebrates the Passover to Yahweh, let all his males be circumcised, and let him come near to celebrate it. And he shall be like a native of the land, but no uncircumcised person may eat of it. The same Torah shall apply to the native as to the stranger who sojourns among you. So Elohim's Torah applies to the native Israelite as well as to the stranger. And when the stranger is circumcised and becomes a part of Israel, he shall be like a native of the land. Verses 50 and 51. Then all the sons of Israel did so. They did just as Yahweh had commanded Moses and Aaron. And it came about on that same day that Yahweh brought the sons of Israel out of the land of Egypt by their hosts. Any questions on Exodus 12? Yeah.
When did they stop putting the blood on the doorpost?
They just did it the one time. Yeah. Didn't ever do it again. Now, the celebration of the Passover is not a reenactment. Okay? It's not a reenactment. It's a celebration, and he tells us how to celebrate it. You do it with a lamb. You do it with a lamb that's sacrificed, bitter herbs, unleavened bread. And that whole tradition that formed out of that, which is what we follow, it's a Haggadah. It's a telling of the story. And from everything we can tell, Yeshua did that. Same thing. So that's why we do it.